Welcome to Radical Personal Finance. My name is Joshua Sheets. Today, I'd like to share with you about why I believe that you should bet on America, why I am betting on America, and give you some insight into the basic ideas and mental model that I think has been the most reliable for me over the past few years. It's been interesting to record. I'm recording this on Monday, June 15, 2026. Feels like a big vibe shift over this last weekend. Not necessarily a momentous 180, but kind of more of a significant vibe shift that's been going on in terms of American confidence and American sense of winning, which is really fascinating to watch. You had the SpaceX IPO, where Elon Musk became the world's first trillionaire in terms of measurable net worth with the SpaceX IPO, which is pretty cool, pretty exciting for last week. Congratulations to him and the many thousands of other people who were able to recoup some of their gains, or to recognize some of their gains in the SpaceX IPO. The World Cup so far has been going really, really well. Games played across the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and that has been exciting to watch. The United States won its first game, which is cool to see, and we'll see what happens in the World Cup. And then, of course, you had the pretty remarkable events over the weekend. The Trump administration, as well as the government of Iran and Pakistan, alleged that a deal of some kind has been reached to end hostilities between the United States and Iran. We'll see what that looks like. And then you had the big kind of spectacle at the White House over the weekend. You had the giant dirt bike jumps, then you had the giant UFC fight set up. And man, tell you what, the optics of that were pretty impressive. I watched just a couple of clips online, didn't watch the whole thing, but I saw some of the clips, and it's hard to get more impressive than the vibe shift, just like the feels of that. And that stuff is really important for Americans, because Americans are a very emotional people, and Americans like winning. They don't do very well when they are when they're losing. It doesn't feel very good. And I'll tell you what, even for me personally, it feels like, man, you know what? I wonder if we could actually be great again as a country. I'm 40 years old, and my entire lifetime, the first presidential election that I remember was the election of President Clinton in 1994. And I was 9. And passing forward, the first real president that I had much engagement with was President George W. Bush. And then you had the attacks, the Muslim attacks on September 11, 2001. You had the Great War on Terror. You had just this constant thing. And then we had a bunch of presidents who basically just seemed to go around spending all their time being embarrassed about the country. And I tell you what, if you're my age, it's pretty much sucked. Pretty hardcore sucked to be an American over the past few decades. In a lot of different dimensions. And you would always read about people in the past who had a great country. You would hear about that in the past. We never really experienced it. But it's been fascinating for me to watch myself and to watch my generation basically have the first emotional moment of, wow, what if we were actually cool? Like, what if we did actually do something great? What if we were actually, successful at things? And that seems, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I think that's pretty important for Americans. And I think that what we see is potentially what the next couple of decades could look like. And over the years, I've been interested in geopolitics. And there is one book that more than anything has really caught my attention as just feeling prescient. There are a variety of books that have been super popular. I finally read The Fourth Turning a couple years ago. I talked about this stuff for a while, and audience members had begged me to read it, so I finally read that. I find the cyclical analysis stuff really interesting. I always wonder if it's true or not true. I really don't know how you could prove it. But the one that has always been the most interesting to me is a book called The Storm Before the Calm by author George Friedman. I like George Friedman, and the first exposure that I had to him was I'm not sure the year, but I was browsing around my library audiobook app one day and I saw a book called The Next 100 Years. And I listened to that book and it really impressed me. And so I became a fan of George Friedman, the author. And that was the book that opened up to me an interest in the field of geopolitics. Well, he published this book a number of years ago called The Storm Before the Calm. Ironically, I think it came out right before COVID. But his basic thesis is this. So first of all, Friedman lays out in the book the idea that America is distinct because America is a deliberately invented nation that is designed to balance individual liberty with national cohesion and national power. And he argues that Americans are an invented people who, because they are an invented people, mostly immigrants and descendants of immigrants, that they have the ability to reinvent their identities and the nation itself in a way that many other peoples do not have. And so the United States has a number of very significant benefits, a very significant opportunities. So the geography of the United States is absolutely world-class, right? You have a vast, resource-rich continent that is strewn with amazing navigable rivers, which enables internal trade and agriculture and expansion across the continent. And then the nation has good borders that protect it from major external threats. Then you have this very dynamic population that, due to the constant expansion westward, the constant growth and change, is very flexible. It doesn't depend upon rigid class structures or ancient traditions. And so the people in that culture are very innovative. They're very mobile. They adapt really well. And then he also argues for the idea of tension as a form of strength. Like the internal tension of America, you have deep cultural and regional differences, that this tension creates a sense of friction and really truly mutual contempt during times of stress and difficulty, but that this drives progress forward, forcing kind of a periodic reinvention rather than a stagnation of the country. This goes back, of course, to the basic concept of federalism. You have Texas and California that hate each other's guts and want to outdo one another. You have Florida and New York that hate each other's guts and want to outdo one another. And so this internal tension keeps any of those states from getting too blasé and really too lazy. So this is the founding point that he makes. Then he talks about the cycles of American history. And he argues that there are two basic cycles that are observable throughout American history. There is an institutional cycle and a socioeconomic cycle. And we can observe in the institutional cycle that about every 80 years, the relationship between the institution of the federal government and the society at large, the citizens within that nation, has been reinvented. And this reinvention gets reset, usually with a major crisis, a major war. And on the other side of that major crisis or major war, we have a redefinition of government power and a redefinition of national identity. The arguments that he would point to include the first basic cycle, that of the Revolutionary era, up through the signing of the Constitution. So the period from the Revolutionary War in 1776 through the signing of the Constitution in 1789, up through the Civil War in 1865, basically being the first 80-year cycle that resulted in the establishment of federal supremacy over the states. The Articles of Confederation did not assure that, but the signing of the Constitution created a new system, a new relationship between the federal government and its citizens and the society and the place of the states. And that was established in the signing of the Constitution. The second of the 80-year cycles has to do with the era from the post-Civil War period up through World War II, so about 1945. So about that 80-year cycle saw, in that next change, saw an expanding federal role where the growth of the government was dramatic through the Great Depression, the Depression-era programs, the wartime mobilization. This led to basically the modern technocratic age, the government by experts. And so if you look back at this and you look and see these cycles, then you can observe that the life of the American in 1730 was very different than the life of the American in 1830, was very different than the life of the American in 1970. And that these were major upsets that were very tumultuous, but after the fact, you saw a basic acceptance of these by the American population. And there's a period of crisis, a period of pain, and then that period of crisis and pain forces a reinvention of the nation. So that's the institutional cycle. And we are now in the next institutional cycle. So if you think about it, very few people are particularly happy with the federal government at the moment. Very few people feel like their needs are being served. And so you can see the strain on all sides. You can see the social unrest. You can see the friction, the frustration. You can feel that political tension constantly, and we're having these wild swings back and forth between President Trump to President Biden, back to President Trump, and yet there is a change afoot. And so we're seeing the reinvention of what it means to be a Democrat, reinvention of what it means to be a Republican. The point is not to say that we know what the next thing is yet, necessarily, but rather just to say that the strain, the storm, is palpable. And yet, this is not new. This is something that we've been through before. Now, that's the first cycle, is the institutional cycle, which is an 80-year cycle. Friedman argues that you can observe also an economic cycle, a socioeconomic cycle, which occurs basically about every 50 years. And in a socioeconomic cycle, you'll have basic shifts and underlying changes in the economy and class dynamics and culture. He argues that this change typically features an initial reform period under a new president, followed by 20 to 30 years of prosperity, then stagnation, a four-shock crisis, and then a resolution of the economic cycle by a new paradigm. He argues, you could see examples of this shift around the era of President George Washington, the post-Civil War industrialization, the 1930s, and the Reagan era, where you had in the 1980s emphasizing kind of markets, individualism, and then tech-driven growth. And he argues that these cycles reshape the classes and the social norms. Now, again, if this is true, if these cycles are to be expected, what's unique about the 2020s is that for the first time, those cycles, the institutional cycle and the economic cycle, are converging for the first time, which amplifies the stress. Past cycles have often ended with a war or a major upheaval of some kind, right? The Revolution, the Civil War, World War II. And the current one doesn't have some kind of clear external enemy. So it'll be interesting to see how this particular cycle resolves. The point, however, is that after you get through the period of instability, you are left with a period of significant growth, peace, prosperity, expansion, economic expansion, and basically people come to terms with the new situation. We all understand here's a new game afoot. We understand the rules of the game. Now we can build. We figured out what does it mean to what does labor mean? What are taxes going to be? What's a Democrat? What's a Republican? And we can build. And so here we are. So in that book, Friedman predicted that the presidential election of 2028 would wind up being the pivotal year. Time will tell if he's right. It feels very much like President Trump in his second term to me. It feels like he might be that hinge president that Friedman was looking for. I don't know. I don't have any predictive power. What I do know is that I can clearly see why he may be right in this basic idea. I can clearly see that once we get to the 2030s and beyond, and we figure out a new relationship with the federal government, new institutions, whatever they look like, and a new economic system that incorporates the changes afoot, I think we'll be set for a period of growth. And I think you start to see a feel of that, of what that could be in some of the events of the past few weeks, right? What SpaceX is doing is absolutely exciting. It's incredible to see what they're doing and where they may go. The amount of cash that they have the ability to work with now is just unbelievable. And Elon Musk is just a total visionary pressing forward. You can see just a sense of confidence, right? I think that for the American people generally, things like the spectacle of the bread and circuses of the UFC fight and the 250th celebration stuff is really, really important for their confidence. There is a conference happening this week that I would really like to be at, but I chose not to. But it's the American Reindustrialization Summit. And man, if I didn't have anything else going on right now in my life, if I didn't have any other projects going, what I would be working on is basically the American Reindustrialization Project. Is that how can we reindustrialize this country? Because we're living in an era where we can basically undo a lot of the hollowing out of America that has happened over the last 50 years with the offshoring movement. And we can rebuild strong and productive communities, a strong and productive industry. Like, we can do it. And so that is exciting to me. It's exciting to me to have the possibility of that. And I think also, we could point to all kinds of issues that people are frustrated about, right? I'm sure you and I, we both have our list of these are the things that frustrate me. This issue, that issue, the other issue. But what I'm going to argue in response to every issue on your list or my list is that these are solvable problems. Like, we know how to solve these problems, right? We know how to solve the problems of fraud. We know how to solve the problems of welfare abuse. We know how to solve the problems of immigration. We know how to solve the problems. What is needed is simply the collective will to do so. And when the collective will to do something exists, then these problems can be solved quickly. So in essence, most of our problems are problems of psychology, right? Of confidence, of the vibes, of the feelings. And whoever can demonstrate, here's the problem, here's the solution, and do that in a convincing way to get enough people to go along with them, that person is going to wind up being able to solve some problems. So I don't have a lot more to say on it. Just want to let you know, like, that's how I feel. And I think that along the way, as for now, 5 years or so, I'm seeing this play out. And so in your thinking, in your bets, I think you should bet on America. I think that is the right move. I travel a lot. I spend a lot of time abroad. I really enjoy working outside of America. But man, if I can be working in America or working with America at some point in some way and be building a base to flow out of America, that is absolutely the pathway for this current moment. And the opportunities that we're going to have over the coming years are enormous. So keep your chin up. Recognize that we have all the basic foundational structure to figure out, to do well over the long term. We have to figure out an economic system that will work for this next period. We have to figure out a political system that will work for this next period. But Americans are really good at invention. We love to invent and we love to go after new things and try them. So recognize that that's where we're at and bet on America.